Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are particularly fortunate to be joined by a very special guest, Admiral William McRaven. Admiral McRaven was a US Navy SEAL for 37 years, leading at all levels, including his final appointment as the four-star commander of the United States Special Forces. He commanded some of the most famous special operations missions ever conducted, most notably the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, the mission that captured Saddam Hussein, and the mission that rescued Captain Phillips. He is the author of multiple books, including Sea Stories and Make Your Bed, which is based on probably one of the most famous commencement speeches ever given. Admiral, it is an honor to welcome you virtually to Cambridge. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, well, thanks, Tom. Great to be with y'all.
We are going to have a conversation about leadership, about Russia's war in Ukraine and Gen Z, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So if you are watching on the YouTube and you have a question, please put it in the comments. And if you are here with us on Zoom, please put an X in the chat and you can ask the question live. Or if you'd prefer, you can write the question in the chat and I will read it out for you. So Admiral McRaven, the SEAL team that conducted the bin Laden raid has been labeled as one of the greatest SEAL teams ever assembled. You hand-selected that team. So I'm really curious to learn what factors went into your decision-making about who you wanted to take on that raid.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. There's a lot of discussion out there that because I was a Navy SEAL, I picked Navy SEALs to do the mission. And I quickly dismissed that concern because at the end of the day, I'm looking for what I thought was the best unit to be able to conduct a mission, on behalf of the United States and the world in this case. And I had two commanders, one Army and one Navy, that I particularly trusted, that I had worked with before. And this trust factor and this recognition of their professionalism, of their work ethic, of their ability to work with others, which I knew was going to be an important aspect of this, was absolutely critical. As it turned out, the Army guy that I had looked at had just gone over to the Middle East, and the Navy guy that I was looking for had just come back from the Middle East. And the reason that was important was because the Navy SEAL squadron that came back was actually on leave. And therefore, that gave me great, as we say, kind of cover for action. So they were on leave, nobody knew where they were. They could have been out, skiing with their girlfriend in Lake Tahoe. But in reality, they were on leave for 3 or 4 weeks. They were working for me. The Army unit that had gone over there, had I pulled them back from Afghanistan, it would have created a signature spike. So I had two commanders in particular that, again, I trusted, that had worked for me, that I knew would be good team players. And so that was the kind of the criteria for picking those individuals. In this case, the Navy commander subsequently went and picked his team. So I didn't handpick the guys below the commander. I trusted him once again to pick the people that he knew would be right for the mission.
Okay, well, I think we'll come back to some of those themes in a moment. But first, I wanted to ask a slightly less serious question about the bin Laden raid, which was there was a situation measuring bin Laden's height. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was all about?
Yeah, so as the mission was concluding, by this time I'm in Afghanistan. I'm in a small room that I had built for myself so that I could be on a video with Leon Panetta, the director of the Central Intelligence, and then later the president. But out of my little room, I could look out the side and see my command center was right there, so I could see everything that was happening. But at one point in time, as the helicopters are getting ready to come back across the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan, President Obama is on the screen, much like you are now, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, Bill, do you know for certain whether or not it's bin Laden?" I said, "No, sir, I don't. I need to go, I want to personally identify the body before I tell the President of the United States and the world that we got bin Laden, because candidly, we'd had issues in the past when we got people we thought were high-value individuals only to find out later that they weren't." Well, my little command center was, just a couple of minutes from the airfield. So I got in a truck, drove over to the airfield. And about that time, the SEALs were just landing in the helicopters. They brought the body, which was in a body bag, off the helicopter, placed it in on the floor of the hangar. And I got down, and I won't be too descriptive, but I unzipped the rubberized body bag. And of course, he didn't look too good. He had 2 rounds in his head, and the beard was a little shorter than you think of when you think of bin Laden, but it was pretty clearly him. But I knew for a fact that bin Laden was about 6'4". And so I unzipped the body bag and pulled the remains out of the body bag and began to kind of stretch the body out, because I'm 6'2". And I thought to myself, well, I'm 6'2". And if it's bin Laden, he's going to be a couple inches, longer than I am. But I was a 3-star admiral at the time, and I thought, yeah, maybe that's not as distinguished as it should be, as I was going to lie down next to the remains. So I saw some young SEAL standing nearby. I said, "Hey, son, how tall are you?" And he said, "Well, sir, I'm 6'2". I said, "Good, come here." I said, "I need you to lie down." And at first he was like, "You want me to do what?" I said, "I need you to lie down next to the remains." He very quickly understood what I was trying to do. He laid down next to the remains. The remains were a couple inches longer. I didn't really think much of it. I said, "Okay, thanks." Got back in my vehicle. I went back to my little command center, and I got back on the video with the president. The president said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Well, sir," I said, "I need DNA to be 100% certain, but, the photos look alike." And then I said, offhandedly, I said, "Oh, by the way, I had a young SEAL lie down next to him who was 6'2", and the remains were a couple inches longer." And there's this long pause on the other end of the video. And again, it had been a serious night with serious implications. But the president turns to me and says, "Okay, Bill, let me get this straight. You had $60 million for a helicopter, the one that went down, and you didn't have $10 for a tape measure?" And again, it was just the right level of kind of comic relief that I needed at the time to kind of lower, the pressure in the room. Well, the next day I had to head back to Washington, D.C. I had to go testify before Congress. And while I'm there at Capitol Hill, I get a call. My aide does, from the president's office, and says the president would like to see you over in the Oval Office. So I swing over to the Oval Office, and the president's there, and I got my little team with me, and he congratulates me. And he says, "I got something for you." And he goes behind the president's desk, and he pulls out a plaque. It's a wooden plaque, and there's a brass plate on the wooden plaque that says, if we have $60 million for a helicopter, we ought to have $10 for a tape measure. And on the plaque is a Home Depot tape measure that he presented to me. So again, I carry that and hold that with great pride. Again, it was a little bit of a humorous moment. Again, in a very serious, serious mission with serious implications. But every once in a while, you need a little bit of that comic relief to, again, lower the temperature in the room, so to speak.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit more about leadership, and I'll kick off with quite a straightforward but maybe difficult question to answer. How do you define leadership? How do you understand leadership?
Yeah, so when I first came into the U.S. Navy when I was commissioned in 1977, and for 200 some odd years, the way the Navy developed their leaders was really based on again, to some degree, the Royal Navy, but the model of the ship. And the captain of the ship, the commanding officer of a ship, was essentially king. When that ship pulled away from port, what that commanding officer said, "Boy, you better do it," because it was about the smooth and effective running of the ship. And commanding officers in the U.S. Navy at the time were known to be a little draconian. I mean, they were screamers in a lot of cases. They put the young junior officers under a lot of pressure. And if you were on the bridge of a ship and you screwed up, man, you heard about it from the commanding officer. And so there was, again, this sort of dictatorial sort of leadership style that, again, it served the U.S. Navy very well. Highly disciplined, highly rigorous, that had served the Navy well up to that point in time. But about that time, we went to an all-volunteer military. And I remember when that happened, I thought, well, this is crazy. Who's going to volunteer to be in the military with low pay, the long deployments, and the sacrifices? Well, the answer was a lot of people did. But what we found very quickly was you could not retain the great young officers and the great enlisted men and women that came into the Navy, in this case, if you continued to treat them as badly, in hopes that, again, you would treat them hard to begin with. If they made it through the crucible, then they were going to be good officers. And so we really flipped the leadership model on its head. And by that, we recognize that a good leader is a servant leader, as we say. And this idea of servant leadership is one that, look, my job as a commanding officer is to make the officers and the enlisted men and women successful at their job. And this held true in every position I held in the military. And then when I went on to be the chancellor of the University of Texas system, very large university system, you realize that your job as a leader is to give the people below you the resources they need to do the job, give them the training they need to do the job, give them the latitude to do the job, and then hold them responsible when they don't do the job. And so again, if the leadership is ever about you, if it's about your promotion and your ego and your advancement, you're probably not the right leader for the job. If you as a leader are about getting the job done, accomplishing the task with the men and women you have and the resources you have, while maintaining the reputation of the organization, if you understand that's what your job is, then you're going to be a very good leader. Now, there's a lot of things that come into play under that. One of the first things you know as a leader is that you really have to share the hardships. You got to share the dangers in the case of the military, the hardships and the dangers with the men and women that work for you. You never want to be the leader that sits in their office in the ivory tower and does nothing but drink coffee and sends out missives. You've got to get down on the factory floor. You've got to get down with the student body. You've got to get down with the faculty. You've got to get down with the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. You've got to find out what their issues are. You have to be engaging with them. You have to inspire them. You have to motivate them. You do have to sit up in your ivory tower and make important strategic decisions. But you find that you will make much better decisions if you understand what the rank and file are doing. And the only way to understand what the rank and file are doing is to get down into the weeds with them and see what their real issues are. Build a culture that they feel comfortable telling you, the boss, what their concerns are. They can't. And one of the things that happens to you when you're a senior officer, as an admiral, you come in and you say, "Hey guys, how things going?" "Oh, sir, everything's going great. And you are the smartest person in the world, Admiral. And we just think this is a great idea." Well, that's a bunch of BS. You've got to get them to the point where they feel comfortable going, "Well, sir, to be honest with you, I don't think this is a good idea, and here's why." Because if they don't tell you where the minefields are, if they don't tell you why the plan isn't good, if they don't tell you why your leadership style is corrosive, then you're going to continue on the path. And again, you will be a bad leader. So you have to build a culture of leadership that the men and women that work for you recognize it's okay to challenge your authority in a respectful manner. It's okay to question what you're doing. But the other part of followership and good leadership is you got all that, but once the decision is made, once you as the CEO, once you as the commander, once you as the person that's running the office make a decision, then frankly, everybody ought to get on board and say, okay, we're good, because that's how good organizations work. Is when everybody gets on board and says, look, we had an opportunity to make our case. They did or did not take it, but at least we had an opportunity to speak our piece. Now let's get on board and make this happen.
Great. Yeah. So you mentioned followership briefly there, and I'm interested to dive into that a little bit more. It's a less trendy term maybe, but potentially equally as important role.
Absolutely.
How do you see the role of followership in relation to leadership and its relative importance?
Yeah, it's hugely important. If you can't, one, as a leader, if you can't get people to follow you, then you're probably not going to get the job done. But two, as a follower, the same premise applies. Being a follower is about getting the mission done, right? It is about supporting the organization. Now, you join the organization, whether it's King's College or whether it's the military, you join an organization to make it better, hopefully, right? But one of the things, and I will give a perspective, in the U.S. military, and the same thing applies in the Royal Military, but the fact of the matter is, in the U.S. military, I have a senior enlisted, a sergeant major, right, who is my right-hand man. And the sergeant major doesn't make the decisions, the commander makes the decisions. But I never made an important decision without consulting with the sergeant major. And the sergeant major kind of represents, if you will, the rank and file. It's management labor to some degree, right? But you build this relationship, as I did with my sergeant major, and I had this remarkable sergeant major, a guy named Chris Ferris. Chris had been in combat since he was 18 years old. He was with me in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then when I became a 3-star commander, I brought him up to be my sergeant major. When I became a 4-star commander, I brought him up to be my sergeant major, because he was not only a great leader, but a really, really good follower. And what he did in his followership was, when I would have a discussion with him, generally kind of one-on-one, he would say, well, sir, I understand what you're trying to do, but I think you need to take this into consideration. Or he would tell the king when he had no clothes, so that's a horrible idea. You know, I know you think it's a brilliant idea, but it's a horrible idea. And so we could have this candid conversation. It made me a better leader. But no matter what our disagreements were, when we walked out of that room, Sergeant Major Ferris, he owned my decision. And by that, I mean, you know, if I had made the decision to go this way and he wanted us to go this way, when we walked out of that room, he would tell folks, hey, this is the direction we're going. He wouldn't roll his eyes like, hey, yeah, what a stupid decision this. He wouldn't try to undermine me. Again, good followers, they make an assumption, I think, that the person in charge is trying to do the right thing. Now, if they're not trying to do the right thing, that's a different path. But if the leader is trying to do the right thing, then you need to get behind them as a good follower. And you need to not roll your eyes. You need to not try to undermine them by, you know, when you talk to your colleagues, you go, yeah, I didn't have anything to do with that decision. That was a horrible. You don't do that, because once that happens, it creates this cascading effect across the rank and file. And all it takes, and particularly in the case of a sergeant major, who has the influence over the entire enlisted, group of folks that work for you, if all of a sudden the sergeant major comes out of that room, rolls his eyes, says this isn't a good idea, you're not going to get the troops moving in the direction you need. So good followership, whether it is at the sergeant major level, whether it is at the faculty level, wherever it is, good followership is about, yes, having an opportunity to state your case, and then being adult enough, mature enough to say, okay, they didn't take my recommendation, but I got it. I'm going to get behind this man or woman, and we're going to move forward anyway.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, really interesting. I want to turn a little bit now towards the tragedy really in Ukraine that is continuing to unfold. And I guess amongst this tragedy, a number of heroes have emerged, and one of them is President Zelensky. I'm interested in what you think about how he has managed to lead his nation against seemingly insurmountable odds.
Yeah, so he has done a magnificent job, and the 3 very important things you have to do as a leader. So first and foremost, as I said, he has shared the hardships and the dangers, right? So everybody that's in the rank and file wants to see their leader being brave and courageous and being down with them and sharing the hardship. If you recall, very early on, the United States offered to President Zelensky a ride out of Ukraine, right? And what was his response? I don't need a ride out. I need more ammunition. What a great line, right? I'm staying with my troops. I don't care if they come kill me. I'm going to hang tough, right? Sharing the hardships and dangers, number 1. Number 2 is stamina. People don't really appreciate the level of stamina you need to be a good leader, and particularly a wartime leader. So President Zelensky is getting maybe 4 hours sleep a night. He and his family are always under threat of being killed. He's moving to the battlefront, on a daily basis. He's probably not eating regular meals. He's not getting exercise. He's not doing all the sorts of things that you need to do to keep your body up and running. You have to have stamina as a leader. And I don't care whether it's a wartime leader or the leader of a college or the leader of a student group or the leader of anything. Stamina is important, because if you show up in the morning and you're kind of hanging your head and you look tired and, it's been a tough day, then all of a sudden you lose the ability to inspire the men and women below you. Because if they think that you're tired, if they think that you're dragging, then once again, it has this cascading effect. So he's 45 years old or 46. Fortunately, he's reasonably young, but still you have to have stamina. And he's been at this now for, a long time. The third thing a leader's got to do, which he has done exceedingly well, is message, the mission, if you will. And what has he done? He has made this a case of good versus evil. If you're on the side of the Ukrainians, you're on the side of good. You're on the side of the Russians, you are on the side of bad. It's that simple. That's not that simple, but he has made it that simple. And he has also inspired the men and women that work for him to say, we're on the side of good. Russians are on the side of evil, and I'm never going to let evil overtake good. He has done it domestically, and of course, he has done it brilliantly internationally. As he has talked to the US Congress, I think he has probably talked to the British Parliament. I mean, as he has engaged with the European Union, with it, it's all about good versus evil. What don't you understand about that? Good versus evil. And that, of course, has brought him arms and ammunition and financial support. And he keeps moving it. And it's a simple message, right? As a leader, you don't want to make your message so complicated. People go, so what the hell are we talking about here? No, this is easy. We were a sovereign state. The Russians invaded us in violation of every international law we know, good versus evil. That's all you need to know. So share the hardships from danger, have the stamina, good versus evil. And he's done that, again, exceedingly well.
So from a sort of military perspective, what is your assessment of where we are now in this war? And do you see a particular end game in mind, which is a scenario that is emerging that looks like it'll be better than all the others and one that we should be aiming for?
Yeah, well, we're currently at a bit of a stalemate. Now, I think we in the West have got to be careful about listening too much to the Western media that is implying to some degree of how the Ukrainians are beating the Russians. Yes, they essentially defeated them in Kyiv and to some degree in Kharkiv. And now, of course, the Russians have swung around to the Donbass. They're trying to build a bridge from the Donbass, down to the Crimea, and then, of course, across to Odessa. The Russians, of course, just have mass. And at some point in time, I believe the Russians are going to achieve their objectives if their objectives are building the land bridge, right? And maybe kind of continuing to crush, maybe even moving to the Dnieper River. But right now, God bless the Ukrainians. They are, in fact, holding up pretty well. The West is providing them the lethal aid they need. What we don't know, of course, is the level of casualties. We don't have a real good sense because the Ukrainians aren't telling us. But we have to imagine the casualties are really high. And the question becomes, how long can they sustain this fight? The Russians currently essentially dominate 20% of Ukraine, and a large portion of the population, maybe 3-4 million within that region. And of course, the Russians are just marching forward in almost World War II fashion, artillery bombardments, destruction of Mariupol and the cities, again, in the Donbass region. So I think sooner or later, and again, the Ukrainians, you have a little bit of give and take happening in the region. But my guess is that the Russians will, at some point in time, overwhelm the Ukrainians by sheer mass and maneuver. When that occurs, and I still think that will be a while, but when that occurs, then you have a little bit of a military inflection point where Putin could domestically go back and say, okay, I've achieved my objectives. I have freed the Russian speaking people in the Donbass. And oh, by the way, I own Mariupol, and now I've created this land bridge. And therefore, I feel comfortable I have achieved what I set out to do. The problem with that scenario is the Russian objectives early on were, I'm going to kick Zelensky out of power. I'm going to make sure that they no longer have an alignment with the West and the EU. And I'm going to essentially own and control the Donbass region. On the Ukrainian side, it's like, we want the Russians to go back to Russia. They're not going to tell us whether we can join the EU or not, and they've got to leave the Donbass area. So, you're never going to get some level of agreement. What you might get, and a lot of it depends on Zelensky almost more than Putin, is what you might get is a level of an armistice where Zelensky says, okay, I will never, ever give the Russians ownership of the Donbass region, but I at least recognize right now they have control of it. And if we have a ceasefire, then maybe we can have further discussions and at least save lives as we move forward. You know, again, I think that is still a ways off. But right now we're in the stalemate. I think you're going to see this kind of minor shifts here and there for the next month or so. And we'll just have to see whether or not the Russians have the firepower to kind of keep moving forward. They're still, you know, while they have blockaded the Black Sea, they still obviously haven't taken Odessa yet. But if they were to take Odessa and that area, you know, west of Crimea, and then own the land bridge, they've basically, you know, taken away what was the sovereign state of Ukraine, because now the Ukrainians have no access to the Black Sea. They can't move their wheat and their potash and a lot of these other things, and it becomes very, very difficult for the Ukrainians. But you know, I hope and pray that the Ukrainians will be successful. But I think we have to be a little bit more realistic about the future.
Sure. Did you think there are any circumstances in which the United States should get more directly militarily involved, whether that's in sending troops or whether it's by being a little bit more direct with how it's sending its weaponry and military support?
Yeah, well, we continue to raise the bar. You know, now we're sending long-range missiles to Ukraine, which I think is all well and good, unless one of those long-range missiles lands in Russian territory. So the only way I think the U.S. now would send troops in would be if Putin begins to expand the fight. So as Finland and Sweden look to join NATO, and now you've got an additional 800 kilometers along the Russian border, which you know even further kind of threatens Putin. Does he take action against Finland? And if so, then is that a violation of Article 5? And then you know we all kind of go off to war, sort of thing. I don't necessarily foresee that happening. But what I think it would take for the U.S. to get into the war is one of two things, maybe one of three things. Either one, a violation of Article 5, Romania, Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, somewhere along that line, right? And again, I wouldn't discount it, but I don't see it happen. Second would be a massive chemical warfare strike where now all of a sudden you see thousands of dead, bloated Ukrainian bodies. And there's just no way that you can sit idly by after a chemical strike like that. Once again, I think the likelihood of that is unlikely, but it is certainly not off the table. And then the last one is a nuclear strike, even a tactical nuke. My sense of things is a tactical nuclear weapon changes everything. Even if the Russians were to explode it out in the middle of nowhere with limited casualties, when you start launching a nuke, even a tactical nuke, I think now you've crossed the Rubicon in terms of the response the West is going to have to muster to say, hey, you are now off your rocker completely, even if we probably think he is now. But now we have a true, you know, madman on our hands if he's willing to launch nukes. Again, I think that's unlikely, but it's not zero.
You mentioned a little bit about Putin's character there, and there's been a lot of analysis about what his motivations might have been, whether he has become insane, and some linking it to isolation during COVID and so on and so forth. You must have had a number of briefings and insights into what Putin's character maybe is, more so than most of us at least. Did you think there is something substantive that has changed in his views of geopolitics, the way in which he goes about analysis and making his decisions, which has led to this, or have we just completely misjudged Putin in the past?
Yeah, I think if we, which we should have done, and again, I'm not an apologist at all for Putin, but if you were to put yourself in Putin's shoes and you say, you know, since 1989 or so, NATO has moved 800 kilometers to the east. 7 out of the 8 former Warsaw Pact countries are now in NATO. Ukraine, you know, which has some great historical ties to Russia, Imperial Russia, now is talking about joining NATO. So you from Putin's standpoint, you see this encirclement And of course, Russia has this history of being overrun by a whole lot of people, and thousands of years of Russian history. You also then take a look at, okay, if I am being encircled here, and NATO really is threatening Russia, do I really want to invade Ukraine? Well, how do I look at this? Well, I see that the U.S. just had a disastrous, evacuation out of Afghanistan. They were embarrassed on the world stage, pulling out of Afghanistan. Biden's polling numbers are in the tank. NATO, after the 4 years of Trump, seems very disorganized and not together. Oh, by the way, my military advisors are telling me that I can be in Kyiv in 3 days because it's going to be a lot like Ukraine, like Crimea. We'll roll in, nobody will stop us. So, from Putin's standpoint, he's being encircled. Ukraine is talking about joining NATO, which expands the encirclement. Evacuation from Afghanistan is terrible. Biden's weak, NATO's weak, and my military advisors are telling me that this is not a bad idea. What a better time than to take on Ukraine, right? So I do think and I will be honest with you, I was surprised. I was surprised that he did a major invasion, because what I told folks ahead of this is, why would he do this? If he does it, he's going to be an international pariah. He's going to have withering economic sanctions. The Ukrainians are going to fight. NATO is going to be stronger, and there are going to be a lot of people in Russia that think this is a bad idea. Why in the world would he do this? Well, of course, all of those came true, which leads you to one of two conclusions. To your point, Tom, was he crazy, or did he just miscalculate? And I think the answer is he just horribly miscalculated. He never really figured that NATO would be strengthened as a result of this. He never really figured that Finland and Sweden, for God's sake, would join. And oh, by the way, that even Switzerland would decide to help out a little bit. So all of that was a miscalculation on his part. No, by the way, the Ukrainians have fought valiantly, and his military has shown that it was not near as modernized as everybody hoped. So horrible miscalculations. But now it's too late. Now he's in there. Now he's got to double down, right? And he will double down, and he will continue to plod forward. And my guess is he's going to continue to stay in power. There are a lot of people out there that are hoping there's going to be some et tu brute moment where somebody stabs him in the back. I don't see that happening. What we know is 80% of Russians believe the invasion of Ukraine was okay. I mean, that sounds surprising, but those are the figures. Countries tend to support their strong men because they're their strong men, So all that said, again, I think we continue to be at a stalemate. But I can't discount anything Putin might do from here on out.
Okay. Well, we're going to turn to audience questions in a moment. But before we do, I just want to ask a couple of last questions about so-called Generation Z, my generation, the generation of a lot of people who are watching this. My generation has received a lot of stick for not having the resilience and the courage and the fortitude of previous generations. But I understand that is not a position you agree with. Could you explain a little bit about why you think that characterization is wrong?
Yeah, to your point, Tom, I mean, I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z you're ever going to meet. And it frustrates me when I hear this narrative, certainly in the United States, and I don't know about the UK and the continent, but in the United States, there is this narrative that the Gen Z folks, they're these soft, entitled little snowflakes, I'm quick to point out, well, then you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan, or you've never seen them going to school at the University of Texas in order to make a better life for their family. They are just as patriotic as their parents and grandparents were. And what I like about Gen Z and the millennials to an extent as well is, yeah, you're different from me, the baby boomer generation, but in so many ways you are better. The Gen Z folks I work with, they believe they can do anything. So I teach a graduate school class, and because they have seen these stories of what's coming out of Silicon Valley and what's coming out of Wall Street and what's coming out of Austin, Texas, where I normally am, They believe that at the age of 22, they can go out and change the world. Why? Because they've seen Americans do it. Great. They've got this great entrepreneurial spirit that says there is nothing I can't do. That's not the way I was raised. I was raised in a little bit of a stratification that said, well, look, you came from a military family. You're never going to be a billionaire. Let's just be honest. You may never even be a millionaire. You're going to be a middle-class guy, and God bless you, maybe you go into the military. If you're really good, maybe you become a lawyer or maybe a doctor, but let's be honest. This is where you are in life. That is not the sense I've gotten from any of the Gen Z folks I've talked to. They don't care where they started. They believe in where they can get to. The other thing I've noticed about them is they have these great friendships, and their friendships are very important to them. And it's not that my friendships weren't important to me, but I have seen that they really value their friendships in a way that is deeper, I think, and more meaningful in some ways than I, as a baby boomer, did. They also believe in causes. Now, I do think that the baby boomer generation, as I look back on the Vietnam War and others, there were Americans mobilized on these things that they thought were bad. But what I've seen with the millennials and the Gen Zs is, boy, if they see something they don't think is right, they will mobilize. And they can mobilize for a number of reasons. One, they know how to use social media to mobilize. They have this friends network to mobilize, and they're not afraid to mobilize. And so when we have a shooting at Parkland, for example, in Florida, you had the students there mobilized. They marched on Tallahassee. They marched on DC. And whether you agreed with it or not, I admired the fact that they weren't going to just sit on the sideline. They were going to do something about it. So I have this great respect and admiration for the younger generations, and I completely dismiss and discount the popular narrative from particularly the baby boomers, because I know my parents. So my dad flew Spitfires in World War II out of the UK, doing cross bomber missions, supporting the bombers going into Europe, and I know that greatest generation, as we have coined them from the US, thought that my generation was soft, entitled little snowflakes. So every generation tends to think that about the young whippersnappers coming up, but in this case, absolutely not true.
There are people watching this who have finished their degrees literally in the past few days. A few are about to leave the Cambridge bubble and enter the real world. So last question from me, what advice would you have to them?
Yeah. My wife hates it when I give this advice. And I think she has good reason for not liking me to give this advice, but I give it anyway, which is you really do have to follow your dreams. You have to love what you do. And if you don't love what you do, you can always go out and make money in the financial world, or you can do something else and be perfectly happy doing that. But if you have a dream about what you want to do, man, chase it. Chase it hard. And it's going to be hard. Particularly if you're not financially secure in what you do. But if you are passionate about something, go for it. Because at the end of your life, you kind of want to look back and go, you know what? I really did what I wanted to do. And by the way, I made a difference, right? I made a difference by being a great artist, being a great performer, being a philosopher, whatever you want to be, go out and do it and be passionate and don't give up on it. The reason that can be bad advice is because, all of a sudden you're 45 years old and maybe your dream didn't materialize the way you wanted it to, and you're not financially secure and you have problems. I got it. That is a risk. No question about it. But the pursuit of the dream, I think that's worth the risk. And then the other thing I would offer to you is, people often ask me, what differentiates those people that are successful from those that may not be as successful? And and I would offer to you that if you want to be successful at where you go, work hard. You're going to come up against a lot of people that are more talented than you are. I mean, I spent my whole career with people that were so much more talented than I was, and I learned from them. They were great friends, but they were smarter, they were physically stronger, and the only way I could compete with them was to outwork them. You show up early, you work hard, you stay late, and this is going to mean you're going to sacrifice. The other question my wife hates for me to get and to answer is, tell me how you strike this work-life balance. And, she'll start shaking her head as the question's coming out. And every time I'm in a forum, somebody asks me the question. And my answer is, there's no such thing as work-life balance. And if you think you're going to have the perfect work-life balance, you're mistaken. And I hate to tell you guys that as you're trying to figure out how you're going to balance, getting married and having kids, or having a partner and having kids, and then being very successful. It's really, really, really hard to do. Maybe somebody can do it. I was not able to do it. And what that means is, if you want to be good at what you do, then you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to work hard, and that means you're going to have to sacrifice something. You're going to miss some of the kids' birthdays, and you're going to miss an anniversary, and you're going to miss Christmas. And yes, sometimes that looks bleak, but if you're chasing your dream, or if you're doing something that is of value to your family, then yeah, you're going to have to sacrifice. Nothing good comes without sacrifice. Again, maybe there's some great power couples out there that have all the nannies to take care of the kids, that have the drivers to get them where they want to go, that have the right, gym subscription so they can go work out when they need to. But man, I'm telling you, those are the 1/100th of 1% of the people in the world. Most of us just have to work hard and sacrifice, and trying to strike that balance is really difficult. Sorry if that was bad news, Tom.
It's all good. Good note to finish this part on, and we'll take some audience questions now. So one of the first ones that was sent in is, did you prefer being a Navy SEAL outdoing the missions, or a 4-star Admiral on the more of the commanding side?
That's got to be a rhetorical question. The answer is, I love being out with the guys. It was nice getting promoted to 4-star because I had spent most of the last 6 years in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan. But there was nothing better than being in command of men and women that were going out and doing the nation's business with our partners and allies, and again, sacrificing a lot and being able to sacrifice with them. There were a lot of hard days, and we lost a lot of young soldiers in combat. It's easy to get nostalgic about it. But then you have to remember those days when you had that feeling in the pit of your stomach, when you hadn't been home for months, when you lost kids in combat. Those were not good feelings, but at the same time, leading in an environment like that, seeing the sacrifice of the young men and women and of their families, it was inspiring every single day. I wouldn't have traded that for anything in the world.
Okay. The next one is, how do you see technological development influencing the structures and the compositions of militaries?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I would offer to you is, at least for the last couple hundred years, as we have looked at technology and the impact on technology, we used to talk about, we had cavalry, guys on horses, and then the automobile and tracked vehicles came along. And it was a hard transition from cavalry to motorized vehicles, but we made and people said, "Oh my gosh, it's going to change everything." Not so much. Then the Gatling gun comes along. Then so there are always these technological changes, but what they don't fundamentally change is the nature of war, and the nature of war is brutal. The nature of war is invariably mano a mano. I mean, I think about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The United States and our allies have the most sophisticated militaries in the world. When our guys went out on missions, we had F-18, fighter bombers overhead. We had artillery on call. I had satellites and drones flying for me. And we routinely got beat up by, Taliban in flip-flops and AK-47s, right? And when you take a look at who, was awarded the Victoria Cross or the Medal of Honor, these were in hand-to-hand fights, guys throwing grenades at each other from 10 feet away. This was not the sterile environment that the people outside like to think about when they think about the technology and how they change. So now, we look at, swarming drones, we look at AI, and we look at machine learning, we look at remotely piloted vehicles. Yes, all of that will change how we are organized and how we fight at a certain level. It is not going to change what happens on the ground in terms of the brutality and what you have to have inside here in order to fight and win a war. I mean, Ukraine's a prime example. Take a look at what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, the Russians have got sophisticated weaponry, but you're still talking about the brutality on the ground. And that's what's going to end up winning the day, I think, is can the Ukrainians survive the brutality of war and give it back to the Russians? So yes, things will change in certain ways, but no, they're not going to change fundamentally.
Okay. Do you think US military spending can be reduced politically? Is that something that would be possible? And then to put some of that money towards tackling things like the climate crisis or reducing inequality and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at that when you look at the military budget. So the military budget, the president's budget right now is like $780 billion. And interestingly enough, that is actually a reduction if you look at it in real terms over the last couple of years. The problem we're running into now is, had Russia not invaded Ukraine or had China not gotten a little sporty, I think we could have done exactly that. And I would have advocated for it. I would have put more money into the State Department, more money into maybe our intelligence networks, more money into, to some degree, into certain social programs, education in particular. However, now, when you take a look at our quote unquote pivot to Asia and what's happening now on the European continent, we're going to find that we're going to have to actually increase the military budget because the systems, the weapon systems we're looking at, kind of to the prior question, we can't use the same systems we bought for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those were relatively cheap systems. You're talking about new guns. You're talking about, armored personnel carriers and MRAPs, nothing overly sophisticated because we didn't need a level of sophistication because we weren't taking on a near-peer competitor. Well, if we're talking about taking on China at some point in time, which I don't think we'll have to, but Russia, well, then we need high-end, very expensive weapon systems, which means the budget's probably going to increase rather than decrease.
Okay. I've got a bit of a deep question here, which is, what would you say to a young person who feels as though their life is without purpose?
Well, one, every life has a purpose. And what I'd offer to you, in my time in the military, I talk about meeting young soldiers who had been in difficult situations. And I'll tell you one story quickly, and maybe this will, I can transition to something else. But when I was the commander of all U.S. Special Operations Command, I went up to Walter Reed Military Hospital. This is where we brought in some of our most seriously wounded, particularly the guys that had lost legs and arms. And so I went up there one time to talk to my guys. We had 5 guys, all of whom were amputees. A couple lost arms, a couple lost legs, 1 leg or so. And I spent about 2 hours talking to my guys. And they were, and I knew how to talk to my guys. I mean, they were Army Rangers and Navy SEALs. And so I talked to them and their family for a while. But as I got through, one of the enlisted guys that was escorting me around said, "Hey, sir, there's somebody else we'd like you to talk to. He's not a special operations guy. He was with the 25th Infantry Division, a U.S. Infantry Division in Iraq. He was in a vehicle that was hit by an explosively formed projectile, essentially a rocket, went into the vehicle, killed everybody in his vehicle, and left him as a quadruple amputee. The rocket blew off both his legs, all of one arm, and partial of the other." I said, "You bet. Happy to go talk to this young man." So I go up to the 2nd floor of the rehab center, and I see the young man leaning against the wall. And of course, he's only this tall because he's got no legs. And he's on his shorties, as we say, kind of short prosthetics. So I kneeled down to kind of get eye to eye to him, to talk to him. And frankly, I don't know what to say. I mean, what do you say to a young man who's lost both his arms and both his legs? And he must have seen something in my eyes, some sort of remorse, some sort of regret. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Sir, I'm 24 years old. I'm going to be just fine. I'm 24 years old. I'm going to be just fine." I told folks I never forgot that. I commanded a force of 70,000 men and women that influenced another force of 1.5 million. So to the person who thinks they have no purpose in life, all you have to do is go to a soup kitchen and serve some homeless person that really is looking for a cup of soup. And you realize, guess what? You just gave hope to that person. You just gave purpose to that person. Find somebody that needs it. I tell folks all the time, look, most of the people I talk to, you're not going to go on you're not going to capture Saddam Hussein. You're not going to rescue Captain Phillips. You're not going to get a bin Laden, but every single one of you can write a letter to somebody, pat somebody on the back, thank somebody for what they've done. Something very simple. Thank them for what they've done. And you have no idea of the effect that has on that person. When you just tell somebody, "Hey, have a great day. Can I help you with something?" Everybody in the world can have a purpose. Doesn't mean you got to run the world, but the ability to influence somebody. I'll tell you one more story because I think this is an important question. When I was in high school, I was running the mile. And I was trying to break the school record in the mile. I'm down to my last race. In the previous race, I hadn't done very well. I was 5 seconds off the record, which in the mile is a lifetime. The night before I'm about to run my final race, I get a phone call from a coach. And he was a football coach, not a track coach. And in Texas, football was everything. I didn't even think this coach knew who the hell I was. And he calls me up. And of course, I'm stunned that the football coach would be calling some little miler who nobody paid attention to. And he told me, he said, "Bill, I understand that you've got a big race tomorrow." I said, "Yes, sir, coach, I do." He goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, you just need to run hard. You need to run as hard as you can, and you can break that record." And the coach so inspired me, I went out the next day and broke the record. And what I told folks is, breaking that record made me realize that I could set a goal and achieve it. And that if I could set a goal and achieve it, maybe I could go to SEAL training and achieve that goal as well. Had I not broken the record, I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to go to SEAL training. And then you look at the next 37 years, and with all due humility and modesty, in those 37 years, just being in a position, I influenced the lives of thousands and thousands of people because of one phone call. I mean, if you trace it all the way back, because of one phone call. So the person that thinks they have no purpose in life, make a phone call. You'll find you have a lot of purpose in life.
Wow, thank you. I have two more audience questions that I'll ask, and then we'll leave it there. So one is from Hassan, which is, how might the nature of the Special Forces program be changing as America emerges from its unipolar moment?
Yeah, great question. And this is always the problem of special operations, is where do we fit in the conventional near-peer competitor war? Well, the answer is we've always had a role to play. So when I think of the Navy SEALs, during the Cold War, we were looking at the port facilities, the Soviet port facilities with some of our underwater capabilities. Now you look at integrated air defenses that are on the coastline. So there are a lot of things that the Army Rangers, the Green Berets, the Navy SEALs can do to support the conventional fight in a near-peer competition. But the other thing is you can never really take your eye off the ball in terms of terrorism. And the other thing, of course, the Special Operations Forces do is we train our counterparts in 90 different countries in everything from hostage rescue to counterinsurgency to conventional operations. So there's not going to be a lack of work for the Special Operations Forces. We will have to make a shift. So the correct assumption is we're now putting a little bit more emphasis onto those missions that over the last 20 years we haven't focused on a lot because we've been focused on the counterinsurgency, counterterrorism mission. Now it's back to how do we help the big Navy, the big Army, the big Air Force, big Marine Corps, and we have a clear role to play in that.
Okay, and finally, you have seen the very best of humanity and its very worst. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about our ability to get over our divisions and tackle some of the hardest challenges the world faces?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic because of you guys. I mean, the question you asked early on, Tom, about Gen Z, my optimism stems from your generation. Your generation is going to get us out of the political divisiveness. Your generation is going to solve climate change. Your generation is going to bring the world together in a way that clearly my generation did not. And I think you will do that because of all the things I mentioned, because you're entrepreneurial. Somebody's going to solve climate change. Some person from Cambridge, some person from MIT, some person from Oxford, somebody's going to all of a sudden solve climate change because they don't think there are any barriers to their ability to do that, right? You're going to build relationships because that's kind of what your generation does. You build social networks through social media, and those networks will get us past the divisiveness. And oh, by the way, you're going to mobilize when you see things that aren't right. Those are the things that are going to get us out of this. Those are the things that give me hope. So I'm always optimistic about this.
That's a great note to end on. Admiral, it has been an honor to have you with us. Thank you very much for taking the time and giving some really insightful and interesting and powerful answers to the questions. And thank you all for watching and for sending in some great questions. If you still have exams, I hope they go well, and have a great summer, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, sir.